Hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel. My name is Malu De Gracia, NXUnite team member at Nexus Marketing, and your moderator for today's panel. Today's panel topic is a vivid vision, strategic planning for nonprofits. As usual, before I introduce today's panelists and we jump into this fascinating topic, I do have some quick logistics to cover. NXUnite is made in partnership with Nexus Marketing and serves as a powerful community resource designed to foster connections and facilitate lasting relationships within the mission-driven sector. On NXUnite, you can find upcoming industry events, suggested influencers to follow, trusted solutions, and cost-driven podcasts. NXUnite also provides webinars, demos, and of course, panels with experts such as these lovely folks with me here today. Today's hour-long panel will include time both for questions curated by my team and questions from you all, our lovely audience. At any time during the panel, please feel free to submit your questions via the questions tab, or you can drop them in the chat. We will spend the second half of the panel addressing as many as we possibly can. Now, if you're having any technical difficulties or have any logistics questions, my team member Anton will be in the chat as the Team NXUnite username ready to assist you the best he can. I also wanted to share that this panel is being recorded, so for those of you watching live, the recording will be sent to your email automatically after the session ends. People can also continue to register and access the recording after the panel, so if you have any friends in the industry you want to share this panel with, simply send them the same registration page and they will be able to access the recording. Finally, before I introduce today's panelists, I want to thank you all for attending this panel. Whether you're joining us live or watching the recording, we're very excited to be in touch with you, the mission-driven community. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today to learn from these outstanding experts who I will now finally introduce. I'd like to first introduce Emily Taylor, who is the principal of Teeny Big. She is passionate about helping nonprofits find better ways to engage the people who matter to them. She guides teams in stepping outside their day-to-day work to meet stakeholders where they are, building stronger relationships and providing better outcomes. Glad to have you, Emily. Also joining us is Eric Morcheski, who is the CEO of NMBL Strategies. He is a dynamic, seasoned leader that sets the tone for NMBL Strategies and in turn for NMBL's extensive portfolio of clients. Whether it be strategic planning for nonprofits to merger and acquisition work for small businesses to turnaround work with court-appointed receiverships, his deep and varied experience make him a coveted leader to create extraordinary change, growth, and success. Thanks for joining us, Eric. Also with us today is Sarah Olivieri, who is the founder at Pivot Ground. She is a globally renowned speaker and #1 international best-selling author. She has 2 decades of nonprofit leadership experience, and she's poured her insight, expertise, and vast knowledge into creating the Impact Method, a powerful framework that helps nonprofits and for-profits alike simplify their operations, improve their capacity, build aligned teams, and make bigger impact without getting overwhelmed or burning out. Great to have you, Sarah.
It's a pleasure to be here.
And finally, with us today is Sean Kramer, who's the managing director at Carter Global. He brings more than 2 decades of fundraising success and experience in achieving outstanding results for capital campaigns and other major development initiatives. As a nonprofit professional, Sean has dedicated his career to creating impact in the world. So glad to have you, Sean.
Great. Happy to be here. Thanks so much.
All right, now it's finally time to hear from our panelists. And Emily, I'll have you start us off with the first question. Why is effective strategic planning so important for nonprofits?
Well, from my point of view, since I work a lot in like helping nonprofits connect communities, I think it's really a chance to stop and pause and not only think about big decisions, but also how those big decisions might affect the people around you, your partners, your donors, your staff, and really bring everyone into the process.
Thanks, Emily. Eric, I'm going to bring the same question over to you. Why is effective strategic planning so important for nonprofits?
I think exactly what Emily was just saying, which is you're working on alignment of your organization, and that's internal and external alignment. And I think it's one of those things that strategic planning is a great opportunity to engage people for feedback and to make sure that they feel heard as a part of your organization, both internally and externally, and utilizing that to really make sure that your whole organization is aligned and moving in the same direction. Because when you get a donor community, a community that you're supporting, and an internal group that all have different ideas of where your organization should be going and how they should be doing that, you really run into issues along the way. And so by utilizing a proper strategic planning process, and I think what Emily was touching on was really important, which is engaging the external community as a part of the planning process, but we always like to bring it back around at the end and also deliver the strategic plan to everyone that was engaged as a part of the process to make sure that they understand they were heard, and here's how we're using their feedback to keep moving it forward.
Wonderful. Thanks, Eric. Sarah, over to you. What makes strategic planning crucial for the success of nonprofits?
Slightly different version of the question. Well, I wanted to actually answer the question, what makes strategic planning effective? Because, of course, if you're doing effective strategic planning, well, then it better be good. And so some of the things that I think of, one is a strategic plan that is easy to adapt and is revisited frequently so that the plan stays up to date with reality. A plan that is getting implemented and tested and refined on regularly makes it effective, so it's not just sitting on a shelf somewhere. We've certainly heard about that too many times. And I want to echo a well-informed plan, right? The better the data we have, like quantitative data and qualitative, the better the plan is going to be. Although I think sometimes, and maybe we'll get into this later, that the data doesn't all have to come as part of the strategic planning process. So if you're not collecting data as like part of all your other work, then you probably don't have a strategic planning challenge, but have kind of a operational effectiveness that needs to get worked on. And the last thing I would say about, what makes strategic planning effective for organizations is that it really captures the organization's current capacity and includes as part of it to bring the organization's capacity, expand it to where it needs to go. I know in the past, I've seen some people kind of separate capacity building from strategic planning. And when I've seen that happen, it just becomes like a set of unrealistic goals that can't be put into place. And for some organizations where their capacity is really limited, their strategic plan might initially look like building capacity and have, very few other components, because, it doesn't really matter. Your strategic plan, I think of it as like your North Star. It's where you're going. It's all those kind of waypoints along the way. But if you're out there in a little tiki raft on the ocean, you're going to be going so slowly. You got to focus on building a bigger boat before you can get too focused on that faraway destination.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sarah. Sean, over to you. Why is effective strategic planning so important?
Yeah, I'm going to bring in my experience actually going through a strategic planning process within an organization, and a slightly different take on kind of the response that we had. When you're in an organization, your head is down and you're just kind of doing your job day to day. It's hard to kind of see the bigger picture, right? The trees through the forest. And a strategic plan allows you and allows the organization to think about the bigger picture of where it is that you want to go. It is that roadmap of how you're going to get to your end result, which ultimately is impact. And having gone through a strategic plan and having the involvement of the community and having the involvement of the board, it really helped us to define exactly where we were going. And I'll use a sports analogy. It was the playbook for us on the football field to be able to march from one end of the field to the other. And it made it very clear with specific goals, metrics, roles, and how we all fit into the plan. And when you're looking for clarity within your organization, there's nothing better than going through a strategic planning process.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sean. All right, we're off to a great start. And Sarah, I'll have you start us off with the next question. What are the key components of a successful strategic planning process for nonprofits?
Yeah, great question. I'm sure we'll have some variety of answers. So I advise nonprofits to do strategic planning quite differently than the traditional model. So based on experience and seeing what works and adapting to our modern world. So for my clients, when we're doing successful strategic planning, we are doing strategic planning every 2 months. We're doing the strategic planning process, and it is happening in perpetuity every 2 months. We call it working in cycles. So we're updating the strategic plan, and then we're executing on the plan for 2 months. And then we're always kind of, I think of it like we're picking our heads up and we're looking at that big picture once every 2 months. And then we put our heads down in the sand and we go, 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 go. And we learn from our mistakes and then we do it again. So really iterating like that. And also, I'm a really big believer that, right, it is the staff that have this data. They have the working information generally to make good plans, which are usually goals, things that we want to achieve that are outcomes, and then specific tactics we're going to use to achieve them. And so we don't need to involve the board. And in fact, the board does not really have the information that they need to come up with great tactics. They might have some, depending on their expertise and experience, individual board members, but as a group, they don't have any particular mojo. And also, in my work and doing visioning work with staff and volunteers and clients and board members over the years, board members actually tend to be less visionary, in my experience, than actually often CEOs. And clients tend to be the most visionary, or organizations that are run by peers. Those peer staff members tend to be crazy visionary. So as far as visioning that big picture of where they're going. So the iteration, keeping it the staff so that they're moving forward and they're not waiting for a board approval or a yes. And then that data piece, right? That information that's coming in. But I really think that it's most effective when in your fundraising function or department, right? Your development office, they should be collecting data and thinking about what really engages our donors. Your programming, part of good programming development is continually being in touch with who you're trying to serve, who you're currently serving. Is it working? So that constituent kind of research that is often lumped, and marketing research that's often lumped in traditional strategic planning, I think that really needs to be done within the organization as part of the organization's day-to-day work to be making the biggest impact possible.
Thanks, Sarah. Sean, over to you. What key components are essential for a successful strategic planning process?
Well, I think there are, I'm going to boil it down to 4. It's listening, 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 and outside counsel. I think those are the most important aspects of a strategic planning process. You have to be open to listening to everybody that is involved or impacted by the organization, because you're going to hear what's working and what isn't working. And you're going to need outside counsel to come in and synthesize all that information and listen in ways that maybe you're just not hearing it. That outside perspective, I think, is really critical in terms of how you're developing an effective strategic plan.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sean. Emily, same question over to you. What are the key components of a successful strategic plan?
Well, I think Sean hit my perspective right on the head. That's what I do is listening, and I think just to dive a little deeper into that area, there's community assessments, there's staff surveys, there's listening tours. There's a lot of different ways to listen, and I think also being um, somewhat strategic about what you're listening for. Perhaps you have some new ideas you might be putting out into the strategic plan. So getting those questions out there, but also making room for things you don't know that you don't know. And so, listening and having that, I was trying to put that, the outsider interpretation. I don't ever mean to make this a sales pitch, but having someone from outside the organization, no matter who it is, can really help you hear what people are saying outside of your bubble of terminology, what you think works, and so those kind of strategies can help you really bring in all the tools to start your strategic plan. And I'm thinking of that football field analogy, and when you're on a football field, there's your team and the other team, but in strategic planning, there's the whole world. And so you really need to kind of dig into some of those depths, not too many where you get distracted, but the ones that are really important to you. And then I'd say another aspect of strategic planning that I don't always see, but can be really a key component of a successful strategic plan is prototyping and testing. So let's say you want to implement a new program, you want to engage a new audience, having some little micro-sized ways to see if those things are actually going to have the effect you want before you go out and execute your strategic plan can be a really great part of towards the end of the strategic planning process to get community feedback on your ideas and make sure they work in that real world scenario.
Thanks, Emily. Eric, what would you like to add to the key components of a successful strategic planning process?
So I think the only thing that I would really add to what everything has been shared here so far is education. And I think by that I mean knowing what you're buying, right? And we talk about this a lot with our clients. A strategic plan is an ambiguous term. It doesn't necessarily have a defined outcome the same way if you go to your accountant and say, I need an income statement and a balance sheet, that is a uniform statement that everyone understands what they should be getting back. Maybe in some different depth, depending on who you're talking to, but they know what they're buying for that purchase. Whereas strategic plan, we do a lot of interim leadership as well. So we go in and act as interim CEO, COO, CFO, and oftentimes we go into organizations that say, oh, it's great, we have a strategic plan we did last October and it's amazing. We haven't really used it. Here it is. And I mean, we've gone into some as bad as saying, we paid $25,000 and it's an Excel template that they could have downloaded for free off the internet. And you have so much opportunity if you educate yourself ahead of the process to understand what you should be buying so that you're asking the right questions as a part of the request for proposal that you're offering, as well as any interview process that you do to engage the right strategic planning consultant, because I do agree with Sean. I think you need that outside party to be a part of this process, because essentially you want someone that can listen openly and not get defensive, right? If your executive director steps in and is leading that process, there is a bias there. There is an inherent protection that happens within all of us. That someone says, I really think we need to be paying more attention to marketing, and they don't believe in that. And that's going to come through even if they don't say it, right? There's an inherent bias that comes out, and it's true to all of us. That's not a judgment on any one person, right? In that we all have that. I'm a numbers person. I'm going to agree towards the numbers and the finances and the accounting and the development more than someone else will agree to more of. We need to listen and feel and empathize. And that's not to say one is right and one is wrong. It's just who we are and what we understand in that process. And so that's where I feel like starting with that education, going into that listening, going into that, bringing in someone that can do that listening for you really starts to create a process that makes sure that you're getting an impactful end game out of it, whatever that end game might be, whether it's something a little bit more unique like what Sarah was discussing, or a more traditional strategic plan that someone might think of. Wherever you are in that, or a business plan or whatever it might be, if you can kind of start with that education of yourself, and that's really been our focus as a firm. So we have a lot of free information on our website that's just there so that people can learn what they should be purchasing. And that allows them to make a more educated decision. One of my favorite things, and I will wrap up here just quickly, but is when we get a request for proposal that I can tell is downloaded from our template request for proposal. And I go, okay, well, at least someone's trying. But yeah, I think that's, to me, really like one of those great pieces to the whole process is really making sure that you understand where you're supposed to go with the strategic plan before you start to go down the path.
Fantastic insight, Eric. Very quickly, I'd like to remind our live audience to start submitting your questions at any time, and we will get to them during the second half of the session. All right, here's our next question. And Sean, I'll have you start us off with this one. How can organizations effectively communicate and implement their strategic vision to ensure that all team members, board members, and stakeholders are aligned and committed to achieving the organization's goals?
Yeah, again, I'll go back to my personal experience going through it within an organization. And I think most important is the communication that is coming from leadership within the organization needs to be both clear, and I think equally it needs to be transparent. There's a lot of I would say just kind of mystery around strategic plans that I have been through. It's kind of done in a back room and nobody knows what's coming, and then all of a sudden it's sprung on you. They say, oh, here's the new vision of what it is that you're going to do. The best organization that I worked with had that transparency where right from the beginning there was a discussion on the fact that we were going to go through a planning process, that we were going to bring in outside counsel. This was the timing of what was going to take place. Here's who's going to be involved at each step of the plan and the process. And when the plan was rolled out, there were no surprises because everybody had a part and played a role in either providing the data, as Sarah mentioned earlier, or they had conversations and discussion that were included and incorporated. So I think for me, it really amounts to that communication that's coming out and a transparent, open process when you're going through strategic planning.
Thanks, Sean. All right, Sarah, on to you. How can organizations effectively communicate and implement their strategic vision?
Yeah, so when I talk about this model of doing strategic planning every 2 months, we're not just repeating kind of the traditional process and doing it all every 2 months. That would be crazy. And I really like to think of replacing traditional planning with a strategic framework so that everybody is continually informing the plan and the problems with executing the plan. And in that regard, we have staff involved with involved with identifying issues, what's working and what's not working in the organization on a weekly basis. We have kind of a mini planning cycle every 2 weeks where leadership staff or the whole staff, depending on the size of the organization, are kind of updating the work plan, making refinements, giving input, identifying potential things that maybe we should be thinking about. And so by the time we're doing strategic planning in 2 months, we've really captured a lot of that data continuously. And it was everybody on the staff was involved. And then they all get to hear about the updated plan, which surprisingly, I found organizations go through various cycles where the plan will stay relatively the same for, 2 months after 2 months after 2 months. And all of a sudden it will dramatically change. Something changed or they're ready to go through a growth spurt. But because the team is involved in all of that communication and problem solving around the plan continuously, one, they feel more involved, right? And two, because each planning cycle is, you're going to revisit it in 2 months, the emotions behind that feeling left out, or is it happening in a back room? They know, well, if my thing didn't get addressed, like I know I got heard, and if my thing didn't get addressed this 2 months, it doesn't mean it can't get addressed in the next 2 months. It's not like set in stone for such a long period of time. And I think that makes people feel a little less stressed. And the third thing that I find is in communication is when the plan can be updated, when everybody is involved in creating the plan, they have much more agency, and it makes it easier to build a culture, if you're intentional about it, where everybody speaks up. And so I totally agree. Outside counsel is great, not just for strategic planning. Like anybody who's solving problems or thinking through how we're going to go somewhere, getting an outside perspective is amazing. But it's also great to train your entire team that speaking up and speaking out is not just is normal and is a positive thing to do for the organization, and kind of getting everybody involved on a regular basis really helps reinforce people to go like, hey, you know, we like to say, like, I call BS on you when I work with teams. I train everybody on the team to call BS on each other. You can't really do that much, or that's not really what the data says. And when that becomes kind of natural and fun, then we start really unearthing, right? Because an outside consultant can sometimes bring an outside perspective, but only someone who's really good at bringing the trust and spends a massive amount of time interviewing all the team members can like get the juicy details of like what's really, really going wrong. But if you train your team to be open about the juicy details all the time with each other, magic starts happening.
Definitely. Thanks, Sarah. All right, Eric, over to you. How can nonprofits effectively communicate and implement a nonprofit strategic vision?
Sorry about that. So I think, one thing to kind of touch on that Sarah was just talking about, and I think it's a really good point to be made, and I'm making a little bit of an assumption on her process here, but I think one thing that we notice a lot with strategic planning process is people get absorbed in the term strategy and forget about the term plan. And I think what she's talking on is she's not changing the mission and the vision of the organization every 2 months, but she's talking about how they're executing that and driving towards those goals. And I think that's a really important piece that gets forgotten a lot of times, is how you're getting to that mission, that vision, those fundamental pieces of what you're doing. I think that's a really good piece that she's hitting on with her commentary there, because obviously she's not going to say, every 2 months as an organization, you should change your mission. And if she is, I'm just going to respectfully disagree. But I think that's just something that, as I listen to her talk, I think that's something that is a really good point to be made, because too often there is 100% of a focus on that higher level of the organization and the planning process, which is focusing on those strategy and plan pieces. And it's forgetting about how you get there. Because if you don't know how to get there, that's when that document becomes something you stick on a shelf, or in today's society, it sticks on your Google Drive and never gets utilized, because you're just not, you're not really capable of really figuring out how to get there. And I think something Sean said earlier, and I think is probably true of Emily and Sarah as well, we've all lived in the role. And I think that's also a unique aspect for when you're looking at engaging someone, is when Sean speaks or when Sarah or Emily speaks, they're speaking from experience of how they've done this and how it works. And I think that's different than when you come into an organization that has career consultants, because those career consultants are telling you how they read about it in a book. And when you've read it in a book, it maybe sounds great on paper, and we've probably all lived through some of those pieces as executive directors or in different roles within an organization, where you really just have this sounds great, but it's not feasible, or it's not possible based on certain aspects of our organization. I was the CFO of one of the largest museum design firms in the world. It was really how I started getting into nonprofits. And one of our designers, who was a little more experienced, that's my polite way of saying older, she said, when she first started out, when they started designing stuff in CAD, they were told they weren't allowed to design something they couldn't build themselves. And that made sure that they could go into a museum and they could actually show the fabricator how to build something if they had to. And I think that's true of the experience of this group here is we're going to tell you how to build this, but we're also know that we can build it. And I think that's a unique aspect when you start thinking about how you're processing through a strategic plan, because again, I go back to ambiguous term and not knowing where you're going with it, and having someone that's walked in those steps, I think is really critical and helpful. Now I will also completely admit I've forgotten what your question was.
Thanks, Eric. All right, Emily, we want to hear from you as well. What are your thoughts on how to
Sure. Yeah, my brain was like, let me connect this back to the question, but all great information. Yeah, I think from my perspective that, when I think of communicating, especially your strategic plan, as we mentioned before, listening is so important. But if you just go and listen and then like put out a strategic plan, that's not really the point of listening. I think part of the point of listening is to get the information, to understand, what space you can play in, how your ideas might work in the real world and with the resources you have. But the other part of listening is to get buy-in. And so if you don't then communicate your process and what you've learned by listening, people aren't going to understand why you didn't listen to their idea, because their idea maybe wasn't really, wasn't shared by everybody. And I just think of like, if I would ask my family what they wanted in a vacation, then I just spit out a vacation to them, they probably wouldn't be excited about it. And so you kind of have to, make your community part of your process. Not so much that there's too many cooks in the kitchen, but enough to help them see your train of thought and how you get there, so that they know why they're a part of it, what they need to do, and they can help you implement in the ways that you see that your vision has.
Thanks, Emily. All right, Eric, here's our next question. What role does creativity and innovation play in the strategic planning process for nonprofits?
I think it can play a great role in starting to really think of who your organization can be and where it can go. But it can also play a really good role in that planning side that we've been touching on as well, because I think there isn't one way to, my daughter would kill me because she's a cat lover, but there's not one way to skin a cat. And I think what we see is there is an opportunity to say, here's how this could work, but let's hear how this works within your organization and how we can make some changes to make it improved or better. So I think the creativity comes from dialogue. And I think that's probably one of those things that Emily really probably addresses a lot of with her listening, is really how to create that dialogue with an organization, because I think an organization has ideas and thoughts and plans, but the more dialogue you can have with the community, I think the more creative you can get with how you go about handling things, but also hopefully more trust within the community, because they'll understand that you're listening to them and you're trying to move that direction that they're looking for. So, I think in that aspect, you can get pretty creative with how you engage people, where you engage people, and where you fulfill their interests. Oh, sorry, David. I'm in a little bit of a bigger room. I'm stuck at a hotel in between sessions.
Thanks, Eric. All right, turning to you, Emily, what role does creativity and innovation play in the strategic planning process?
Well, similar to Eric, I actually have a former career in a design role, and so I'm very used to having that space to have your problem and then just think wildly about what could be, and that can be looking at what other organizations have done, looking at what for-profit corporations have done, looking for ideas at your church, your school, and having that space to bring them to the table. And that's why I know someone had a question about design thinking and that process, which we'll probably dive into more deeply later. But that idea of being able to like kind of diverge and just have like a whole bunch of ideas, and then, you know, make sure you bring that reality in, the what can you build, and focus it. But having that space to get outside perspective, get outside ideas, can allow you to not just do things the way they've always been done. And that, you know, the idea of prototyping and testing those ideas can help give you that reassurance that like, we're not just wild and crazy nonprofit. Like, we can take this new idea and see if it's gonna solve the problem that we're trying to solve.
Thanks, Emily. Sean, over to you. What role does creativity and innovation play in the strategic planning process?
Yeah, I love this question because I think for me, you know, going through strategic planning and working with organizations that are thinking about the problems that they're trying to solve in the world, you know, the notion that what we've been doing all along is going to be the way that we're going to continue doing it. That stale based thinking, I think, is where organizations get into trouble. It equally, you know, impacts your ability to raise dollars. If donors see that you've been doing the same exact thing without results, you're going to lose those donors. And so, being able to think creatively and have that innovative approach to what it is that you're trying to do, and say to yourself, just because we've been doing it this way, you know, all this time, doesn't mean we need to continue doing it this way. So how can we think differently? And as organizations bring in new employees, new team members, they come with different background and perspective. So they're adding new thoughts and ideas. So a strategic plan can allow for all of those types of thoughts and thinking to come into play. And the organizations that do embrace that type of thinking openly will have much better outcomes at the end of the day in terms of you know, their ability to engage both their donor base and the community that they're trying to help as well.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sean. Sarah, what would you like to add on the role of creativity and innovation in the strategic planning process?
Sure. What Sean just said, I want to zero in on outcomes and innovation. So to me, creativity is a tool for getting innovation towards outcomes. So not all nonprofits, but so many are solving the world's most complex unsolved problems. And you can't solve those without innovating. And I have my vision for the nonprofit space, which I'm going to need a lot of help getting there. So is that when in the whole business world, when we think of who are the most innovative businesses, we don't think of like Google, we think of the nonprofit sector as being filled with the most innovative businesses who are solving these like really complex problems. So why be creative, right? We have to let our brains connect dots that are far apart. So and I think one of the best ways to be creative is to run scenarios, ask questions that inspire creativity. Just two, so people have something to take away that I like to ask. Sometimes I like, when I'm working with groups, I like to gift them like a gajillion dollars. Sarah waves her magic wand and you now have unlimited money. What do you do, right? It's a great way to open up the mind because so many of us are constrained by money concerns. Or another great creative question to get those juices flowing is, you know, if you just were totally scrapped and had to start from zero tomorrow, what would you do? And then compare that, you know, to what were you thinking you were going to do? Just free yourself from whatever constraints you have for your brain and see what emerges from that. And then, you know, think about reality, right? You want to make a plan that's very much in tune with what you can do and be moving forward. And interestingly, I'll just reference back to Eric's comment, right? So every 2 months, my clients have the opportunity to say, like, is our vision still our vision? Is our mission still our mission? And, you know, like 99.9% of the time, the answer is yes. There's a good percentage of that time where like, yeah, it's still right, but the wording is no longer the best it could be. We have a better way to state our vision or a better way to state our mission. Interestingly, actually, in my entire career, I've only ever worked with one nonprofit who genuinely needed to change its mission. So usually the essence, at least, of the mission statement might change, is usually there, and doesn't change very much. Being creative is super important to innovate. And the other thing I would just say is, author I love, Nicholas Nassim Taleb. I never know if I'm saying his name right. He wrote The Black Swan, and Skin in the Game is actually my favorite book of his. But he has, I think he calls it the barbell principle, is that kind of in any strategy, you should always have like 90% of what you're doing should be like a sure thing, like on the safe side. And then 10% should be totally risky and like really speculative and like try stuff out. And I balance that out with some of Dave Snowden's thinking. He created the Cynefin framework, which is definitely worth looking up for anyone who's ever making decisions, which I'm assuming is a lot of you. But he talks about safe to fail experiments. And I love that language. And right, like, so often we're moving into uncharted territory, right? There isn't a direct map. Someone hasn't already been there. We don't know how to achieve our mission already. So we kind of have to like send out some scouts, right? And see what works, what doesn't. And, we don't want to do something that, we put all our eggs in one basket. But we do want to be experimenting. And our industry is filled with the opposite message. We're told not to experiment, just play it safe. And it's crushing our ability to make an impact. And just in case you need another metaphor, another one that I love, which is from Great by Choice. Is that Jim Collins? I think Not Good to Great, which is not as much my favorite, but I like Great by Choice. And he talks about this: fire bullets, then cannons, right? So if you think you know where you want to go and you've got a bunch of ideas, fire a bunch of little ideas, see what works. And then when you know it works, then you shoot the cannons once you've got some traction.
That's wonderful. Thanks, Sarah. Emily, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I just had to add, because I'm very inspired by what you're saying, Sarah, because it really kind of, it crosses that line of nonprofit and for-profit. How do we take some of those things, the innovation that we, perceive for-profits doing? And so just to add to your list of questions, one of the things I'll often ask organizations, what if Microsoft needed to get, every children in your city a backpack before school, or, just Patagonia, and taking these different, just very almost jarring examples and comparing them, like how would they look at your problem, can help, bring some of that crossover together.
Wonderful. Thanks, Emily. All right. This is the last of my questions before opening it up to our wonderful audience. I've seen a few questions have already come in, but before I open that door, I want to sneak in my next question. And Sean, I'm going to have you start us off with this one. How can nonprofits ensure alignment between their strategic vision and day-to-day operations to effectively execute their plans?
Yeah, that's a great one. I think oftentimes when we get called, organizations say, "Well, we like what we're doing. We just want to do more of it," right? And what we're trying to do with the strategic plan is really align them for the future. And on the development side, what I always say is, little ideas bring little money, big ideas bring big money. And so what we're trying to do through the strategic planning process is to get them to think about those big ideas. I love the point, the panelist said before around, I think Sarah mentioned it, I do this all the time. If I were to give you a transformational gift, right, and it's not $1 million, well, it depends on the organization, but let's say a transformational gift. If Jeff Bezos comes in tomorrow and says, "Here's a check for $100 million, what would you do?" And get folks to start thinking along those lines, I think it opens up the dialogue and conversation of, okay, are we going to just continue doing what we've always done because we've just always done that, and then we're just going to layer more things onto it? Or are we going to really rethink the way that we're doing it, and how we're doing it, and why we're doing it? And ultimately, what I'm looking for is, will it will it align with the mission and the impact that the organization is trying to achieve, right? That to me is paramount when I'm having conversations with with organizations in terms of what it is that they're trying to do in terms of developing a strategic plan and that roadmap, right? So are you going to score one touchdown, or are you going to be, I would use the Miami Dolphins, but they're terrible. Are you going to be, are you going to be the New England Patriots, and you're going to score like Tom Brady every single time you go down the field? That's what I'm looking for when I'm trying to figure out how you align what they do on a day-to-day basis operationally, and where their strategic plan aligns.
Thanks, Sean. All right, Eric, over to you. Thoughts on how to ensure alignment between strategic vision and day-to-day operations?
So I think, to me, it's kind of a three-step process. And one is making sure that you're gaining that insight and engagement early on. Two is bringing that around to make sure that your planning can deliver your strategy and your vision. And then three is, again, sharing it with everyone after you've completed the planning process, because it allows them to hold your feet to the fire, but it also allows you to adjust on the move, because you could tell people, here's where we were going, here's why that didn't work, and here's how we pivoted a little bit there and how we adjusted. And I think that's really critical, that you have that ongoing engagement. And what we've seen is we were doing a strategic plan for America's Black Holocaust Museum up in Milwaukee a couple of years ago. And the groups that have really followed that have really seen it pay off on the development side as much as anything, because they like that they're knowing that there is a plan in place and how they're going to get there and where they're going with it. And I often joke, if everyone could be as fortunate as America's Black Holocaust Museum when they're using that strategic planning, I wouldn't have to go sell very much, because they received a $10 million gift out of the strategic planning process. And that doesn't happen very often, unfortunately. But that transformational gift that's been mentioned, and I think that's really a critical thing, that it was that continuous engagement in that direction that they could share, that so many organizations really struggle with being able to share, that allowed them to really be successful as they move forward.
Thanks for sharing, Eric. Sarah, you're up next. Any advice on how nonprofits ensure alignment between strategic vision and everyday operations?
Yeah. So, first of all, alignment to me is so important, because it's the thing that unlocks capacity even more than money, right? You have to have the right kinds of people on your team to be on your team. It has to be a plan that's in alignment. They have to have a way of operating and executing. It's getting everybody, rowing on the same boat in the same direction is so important. And I'm a little particular with the words I use, because I think they influence how we think. And when I think of strategic planning, and the piece of that is really around, you have your goals and your tactics. And I break goals down into some other things, but that's a panel for another day, unless people want to know goal setting tips. And you have your actual action plan, right? How are you implementing that plan on a day by day, week by week basis? And then related to that strategic planning is that big, how do we know where we're going? Like, how do we clarify our mission? How do we decide what are our rules of the road as an organization? What do we need? How do we need everybody to show up in our organization? And that vision of the future. And I think of those pieces as well as a core belief. I think of those pieces as brand, internal brand. I call it the heart of the brand. It's who you are as an organization. And you would be that even if you didn't know where you were going, you would still have an identity, right? Like, even when I don't know where I'm going, I'm still Sarah, right? And you're still your organization, but your plan tells you where you're going. And it's that visioning piece, which is so powerful for bringing alignment. when you do an exercise of what does our organization look, not the whole world, just your organization look like in 10 years or in 5 years, right? That is a tool for opening up creative juices, like in our previous question. And it's also a tool for creating alignment, because people are very visual. And when they vision that future, and I say, do you want to go to a future where your organization is fully funded and you're serving 10 times as many people and nobody's overworked and everyone's really happy and you have all the resources you need, the amazing building or the cars, and all the problems are solved? And you're like, yes. And you walk into the door and you smell roses and the sun is shining and you start to feel it. You say, yes, I want that, Sarah. And I say, okay, here's the roadmap of exactly how we're going to get there. That's the strategic plan. You say, sign me up. I'm going on that trip. Not because you want to take the journey necessarily so much, but because you want that result. And so just having a clear vision of what your organization could look like, is such an important alignment tool. And as a side note, I encourage organizations at least once a year, if not potentially every 2 months, to throw their strategic vision out the door and create a new one. And that obviously, as I've said before, every 2 months, that does not happen. People don't throw away their strategic vision. But what I find is, kind of on the first round of strategic visioning, sometimes people are a little nervous and they don't dream big enough. But after they start to get some traction and see that they can make things happen better than they did before, like those big steps Sean was talking about, then all of a sudden they get a lot braver and they're ready to say, you know what, we were just being too cautious with that previous vision and we're ready to go for something bigger. Or the world changes. Like in the pandemic, a lot of people had to change their vision of what they were going to look like because we've shifted the way we work and operate and how we do things online. And that was a great opportunity to say, yeah, our old vision was like, so 2 years ago. We're in the new now, and we need to envision this for ourselves.
Thanks, Sarah. And Emily, any additional thoughts for alignment?
I think just to remember the psychology of it, I think part of the reason it's hard or the reason we even do strategic planning, what we're talking about, is to get yourself out of that day-to-day, because it's a different part of your brain that is figuring out what time do we need to schedule this meeting? How do I get this box over to this, warehouse? And so being able to let yourself do those day-to-day tasks, but have that time to step back. And so, the way Sarah has talked about, checking in, but I think whether it's, every 6 months or 2 months or annually, to be able to, use your day-to-day brain and then make some time to use your visionary brain to check and balance what you're doing, and make sure you're on the right path.
Thanks, Emily. All right, we're officially opening our Q&A portion. And Emily, I'm going to actually stick with you for this question. I know you touched on this earlier, but what do you think of planning methods like design thinking?
So I was brought up in the world of design thinking, and that idea is to really, do some research, do that listening to understand the problem that you're trying to solve a little better, using that open space to ideate and pull in ideas from different places, and then being strategic about choosing some of those ideas and going out and testing them in the world. I think in the nonprofit space, it can be, testing can be a little sensitive. And so trying to find ways to do that. Done it in terms of like prototyping a website, prototyping ads, getting those things out in front of, just prototyping messaging, getting those things out in front of people and seeing how they really react to it and as close to a real scenario as possible. And then being able to revise so that you don't just have one chance to get it right. So that's the design thinking process. I haven't particularly seen it used other than like small parts of a strategic plan where you have an idea and then integrate that into the strategic plan. But it's really being able to bring in the outside a few different times to make sure that new idea isn't as risky as you might think if you just put it out there.
Thanks, Emily. Sean, anything you want to add to that question? Otherwise, I'll have you start us off with the next one.
Yes, the only thing I would just kind of add to that is, yeah, I agree, Emily. I think most nonprofit organizations are kind of risk averse. There's always the notion that, well, we can't fail, right? So I always encourage when new ideas are being thought of, before you just simply plug it in as a potential prototype, is to do some testing, right? Take it out into the field and have conversations with your supporters, and the community, to ask them what they think about what it is that they may actually test before you actually do it, and then come back and revise it. You'll get a lot of information in that way. So that would be my recommendation, is to actually take it on the road and road test it.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sean. All right, we have a few minutes left for questions with this amazing group. So sorry if we haven't addressed your question yet, but please complete the survey that will be dropped in the chat to indicate which panelists you have questions for, and we'll make sure to connect you with them after the session. So we have one more question. Sarah, I'll have you start us off with this one. What if you're a one-man band and you're a very young organization? What advice do you have for BUNME?
I will give you your strategic plan right now. You have one goal, which is to staff up. I happen to be giving a training on that tomorrow. Reach out to me if you want to know. But that is what you need to do. One-man band organizations are not sustainable. And so you do need to work on clarifying that heart of the brand piece, who you are as an organization, so that you have, because you need that in order to add staff. But to think that you can just go it alone, or just go indefinitely with no money, or live just on volunteers, is not going to scale. Roughly, I mean, it's so hard to size nonprofits, but somewhere around that $250,000 operating budget mark is going to be your cap. So if you're a community club and it doesn't matter that you don't scale, fine. And you can do all the things and it'll be part-time and you'll be okay. But if you have a mission that is worth scaling your impact and reaching more and more people, you're going to need to be adding staff, adding resources, and always focusing on growing the resources first and then adding the programmatic piece. I like to say all nonprofits, part of what makes them more complex, they're making mission pie and they're making money pie. And the biggest mistake that I see nonprofits make is first they grow their mission pie and then they're trying to play catch up growing their money pie. And you really need to grow the money, grow the resources first. And then when you have enough to continue growing more resources and start making more impact, then you grow your mission pie. And so you always have to have your money pie ahead of the game a little bit. And the best way to do that as a one-person show is you got to be focused on growing money pie. And what you're going to do with that money is invest in staff. And so often, I'll tell you, it's getting an assistant for yourself who can help you execute on everything, because you're not ready to divide up into departments. And so a new founding executive director plus a roughly 20-hour-a-week executive assistant can really move the needle a lot, especially if you focus on building some major donors as your next step. You can see I've done this before a few times. Then once you have a few major donors who can fund a little more growth, you're going to be on your way and running pretty quick.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sarah. Eric, anything you want to add to that?
I think really, as a one-man band, I think, again, I think people get, and I think this is what Sarah was saying, is people get absorbed in the mission and they forget about the financial side of things. And, we deal with organizations that reach out to us and they're 5 years in and they're still filing that 990 in. There's something happening that's preventing you from going above that $50,000 mark of funding. And so I think, people like Sean, who have a significant development background, are probably in that mantra of, ask for more funds. And I think there's those of us that maybe don't feel comfortable asking every time we get a chance and for as much as we possibly could. And so I think you but you do need that mentality a little bit, especially as you're in growth mode. Is you can't think of yourself as small and therefore ask for small dollars. You need to think of yourself as, here's where we're going and here's the money it takes to get there. And so if you can really pair that mentality with connections, and I think that's the other piece then that really factors into that one-man band, you can really start to make those connections, make those right asks, and start to grow rapidly. From a strategic planning standpoint, I would say start with the basics. So there are some fundamental pieces you need, because you need to be able to clearly articulate who you are and why you're there to make that ask. And if you don't have that down, and anyone else, so your board, if you have state of Missouri, you have to have 3 board members to start a nonprofit. And so if all 3 of you can't exist with the same story of why you're there and what you want to do with it, then you haven't aligned yourself properly. And I think that's really critical. And that's what even the most basic pieces of a strategic plan, starting with your mission, your vision, we like to add in an elevator pitch in that piece, so that you can just have a quick rhetoric of who you are, and then how you're trying to accomplish those things. Even in the most basic sense of that, start there and take that into, now here's how we're going to scale up our resources to start delivering on that message.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Eric. Unbelievably, the hour has gone by so quickly, and we have reached the end of our panel. I want to give a big thank you to our panelists today for sharing their insights. I also want to give a big thank you to our audience. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you enjoyed and learned something that will help you that will benefit the work that you do on a daily basis. All right. That is it for me. Once again, thank you all for joining us, and have a nice rest of your day. Thank you, everyone. Bye.